Writers, hello. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up. This is just my podcast where two authors sit down and talk about whatever comes to mind. It's just a free-form conversation punctuated at the end by an impromptu storytelling that is usually a shit show, but fun. But fun, and it was a good one this time. I think we did a good job, but I'll leave that to you to be the judge of that. Before we get to today's guest, I want to say I think we've got this whole Paris retreat thing figured out. I am recording this on May 12th. We're about to sign a contract for dates in Paris, which are going to be May 3rd through 6th of 2027 for an intimate writing retreat in Paris, talking about suspense, talking about crime fiction. Myself, Alex Finlay, Clemence Michelon, and hopefully some surprise guests. This hopefully gives me enough time between now and when this episode launches to update the website so you can go ahead and register. But you'll be able to find all the details at unboundwriter.com. I'm super excited for this. The space looks amazing. It's going to be great. So check that out. All right. So today on the show, and a friend of mine, Lauren Nossett. So Lauren is a great writer, and she has her upcoming book coming out, which is Indie Darling, and that's coming out in July of this year. This is her third book. And so I know Lauren, and we kick off the show talking about how much she does in terms of visibility, in terms of newsletters, Substack, social media, and certainly networking and creating deep connections with other authors through going through conferences, which is how I got to know her. And I am part of this Thriller Thursday crew that she created that puts out Substack newsletters along with a lot of social media behind it, where we talk about other people's books, we do interviews and all those kinds of things. But she is the far and away the driving force behind it. So she's really got a very strong vision about how to reach readers, and it's fantastic. And we even reflected towards the end of the show that we haven't actually spent that much time one-on-one in person talking to each other. So this was a great opportunity for us to catch up. I had no idea she has a PhD in German literature. I think she says maybe German comparative literature. I had no idea she wrote six historical novels with a literary bent before she wrote and published her first thriller. So I found out all this fascinating stuff about her, and it was really interesting to talk to her. She's accomplished a lot in what seems like a very short amount of time. And, to cap it all off, her first book won the International Thriller Writers Award for Best First Novel, which again, we talk about at the end. It's a really big deal. It's the Academy Awards of thriller writers, and she won. So she's very accomplished. And again, Indie Darling is out in this July. So you're going to like this one, folks. This is my conversation with my friend Lauren Nossett. So you're the first interview that I'm talking to post ThrillerFest, which is actually really appropriate because when I think of you, Lauren, I think of like how proactive you are in terms of doing all the things I just taught at ThrillerFest, which was being a visible writer. Um, really, what do we, the theory I have is that writing a great book is now the minimum thing we have to do. That just kind of, if you're lucky, gets your foot in the door. But to stay relevant and stay known, you have to have a face out there. And I feel like you're so aggressive about that in a very good, positive way. Was that something that just kind of comes natural to you? I mean, you're very obviously outgoing and you seem to enjoy it.
I mean, I do. I love that part of it. I think for me, that has been one of the greatest surprises and maybe best parts of becoming an author is getting to meet other authors. So that's something that I just love. And I mean, I was thinking about this weekend because this was my fourth Thriller Fest.
Okay.
The first one I went to was in 2023, and I walked in to the opening reception, which at the time was in the Sheridan, at the Sheridan, in that big ballroom of like hundreds of people. And I am an extrovert. I love people, but I walked in that room and I was like, I don't know. I don't
Totally.
know a soul. And I had that moment of panic, like, should I just turn around and go back to my room and just hide there for the rest of the weekend? But luckily, I saw Wendy Walker, who had blurbed my debut, The Resemblance. We'd never met in person. I'd actually just DM'd her on Instagram, and she was kind enough to say yes and read and blurb it. And I walked over and I introduced myself, and Wendy took me around and introduced me to so many people. And from there, now I feel like I had this amazing community to where I walked into the Hilton, the first day this weekend and ran into, five people I knew, which is amazing.
Right. Now you get to the point because I've been going since like 2008. Not every year, but most. So before I was published. And now you're like almost like if I go in there, I'm not going to get in 10 feet before I'm embedded in conversation, which is also great, but it's also kind of like there are so many people you want to talk to. Were you
Yes.
part of when was your first book? When did you debut?
So it was in 2022. So then I
So
did
were you
that.
part of the debut author program? Great. So
Mhm.
yeah, so I do that with Elena now.
Okay.
And so we always set up at that Thursday night thing, we always set up a booth like for debuts. Like if you don't have anyone to talk to, we're just going to be hanging out here all night.
I wonder if they did that before, because if they did, I totally missed
I
it
don't
because
think
I don't
so.
think
I
I've
think it's
hit.
just been the last couple of years.
I mean, that's
Uh,
so helpful because it is really, really overwhelming if you don't know anyone. And I've since now, met people who are debuts or people who've never come before and tried to do what Wendy did for me and be like, okay, let me introduce you to
totally.
some people. But it's amazing that I mean, it's part of why it's exhausting because you're going from talking, lunch to dinner to whatever happy hour to banquets, but it's all so much fun.
Yeah, and the other side of it all is you walk into that room the first time. And it's not only it's full of hundreds of people, you start seeing these names like, holy shit, that's a big name just hanging out. You're like, oh, there's Lee Child. Like, what am I doing here?
Right.
And it can be super intimidating, but we all find out that these suspense writers are the kindest, most, I think. I've never had any issue with anyone. No one's looking to backstab you. Everyone's trying to support you. It's amazing.
No, I mean, I 100% agree. I think everyone's so generous with their advice and with their feedback. And I think too, you don't know. I mean, there's so much you don't know, right? I'm still learning now, my third book's coming out, and I feel like I only now even know the questions I should ask. At the very
Hmm.
beginning, I just knew so little, I didn't even know what I could ask for. But through having conversations with other authors, through even seeing what people are doing on social media, it's like, oh, okay, this is a potential opportunity. So when I was in New York, was that only this past weekend? This
Yeah.
past weekend on Friday, I went to my publisher and I recorded my author's note, which I've never done before for
Hmm.
this book coming out in July. But this book is a little more, the author's note is a little more personal, and I just really wanted it to be in my voice. And I only knew to do that because I had seen someone else do it, and I was
Huh.
like, that's
Yeah,
something I
that's
wanted
great.
to do.
And I don't think anyone sees anyone else as a threat, right?
Right.
Having a vibrant author community and therefore, a great series of books coming out only, lifts all boats. So I don't, no one's making the decision like I'm going to either buy your book or Carter's book. It doesn't work like that. So,
Right.
and ultimately it is you that has to come through with the talent and the voice. So I don't think anyone's ever shy about giving advice. If anything, I just find some people are just like, kind of introverts and they just like shut down kind of quickly. They're like, all right, I've been here 5 minutes. That's enough.
No, I mean 100% because you're right. That's the amazing thing about our readers too. If a reader reads one thriller book by the author they like, they want to find other authors similar to that author and read more.
Right.
They may not be quite as insatiable as romance author or
Right.
romance readers, but I do
Right.
think thriller readers are always looking for that next thrill. So we don't have to worry that just because someone's reading, if someone's reading your book, they might also like my book. So it doesn't feel like there's any kind of competition. If anything else, we are really good at recommending each other's books.
And that being said, and obviously I'm talking out of my ass here because I don't know anything about the romance community except for what I read online and hear from other people. I agree that the fandom is fierce. with romance, but I think it can also parlay into bitterness, and you just hear more kind of controversy, I think, within that community than I think you do in the thriller community. So I don't know if there's a thing there, but I feel like the thriller community is pretty mellow.
I have a theory, and I've heard this said by other people too, but that because as thriller authors, we're getting out all of our violence on the page, it makes us very nice to interact with in real life. But I suppose in romance, if you're just putting just love and sunshine on the page, then maybe there's nowhere else, there's no other outlet for
Right,
it.
right,
Violence
right.
that's in real life. So
And I think
I don't know if there's any truth to
the
that.
other side of that same coin is that we're getting out stuff that's scary that we can explore and be safe. And I think if I were exploring like all these amazing, beautiful sexual relationships, and then I finish the book and I'm like, I'm still alone, then I'm gonna
Right. Or reality doesn't live up to perhaps what you, I like, we
right,
don't
right.
want
That's
our
a much more
reality to
kind way
play
of saying
out.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you're in Nashville.
Yes.
Did you grow up there?
No, I'm originally from Georgia and moved around a bit. And Nashville is actually the first place I kind of chose to live. It was where I moved after I was writing full time, and I just loved it. I kept doing long-term Airbnbs, and every time I would do one, I'd extend my stay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I just
Yeah,
love it.
Nashville's great. I've spent a lot of time there. It's grown a lot
Yeah.
over the years for sure.
Yeah.
What was growing up like? Like what was were you a creative kid? Were you always inkling to write, or were you like me and like zero clue and went into business?
Well, I mean, so I was always writing. In fact, recently I had looked for this for ages because I knew it existed. And I'd looked in all these boxes my mom kept and couldn't find it. But I had written a story called The Specialist Key. And it
Hmm.
was before I'd learned superlatives. So it should have been the most special key. And it was, a key that opened doors to all kinds of magical places. And that was in third grade because we had a teacher who just, I think it seemed like an hour. It was probably only 5 minutes before
Hmm.
started. But when you're younger, time moves differently. But she allowed us just 5 minutes to write. And I worked on that story throughout that class and I illustrated it and everything. And my mom found it recently. So I got to, so that's the first story I remember writing. And then I was always writing or painting. I did painting for a while, but writing's nice because you can pick that up anywhere. Where I think sometimes now I haven't painted in a while just because to get out all the supplies,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus writing I can do on my phone if I have an idea. It's a little bit more accessible. But yeah, I wrote a lot when I was little, not as much in college, but then in grad school I started writing again. And I actually wrote 6 novels before The Resemblance, which was my debut was
Wow.
published.
All right,
Yeah.
let's back up a little bit because there's a lot to unpack there, obviously. So you obviously have a very creative brain and you're, looking for ways to express that, whether through its art or through writing or whatever. Did you make that decision when you went to school to study something in the creative arts, or were you practical and smart?
So it's funny. I went in thinking I would do international business because
Hmm.
we moved to Germany when I was 12 and lived there. And I'd start learning German. I just realized the world was much bigger than, our town in Georgia where I grew up, a suburb of Atlanta. And I thought that was practical. That would allow me to travel. But then I took a comparative literature freshman seminar. So it
Hmm.
was we read War and Peace for the entire semester and discussed it with the professor. And it was lovely. It was like a semester
Hmm.
long book club for one book. And so I fell in love with comparative literature. What I didn't realize is that in the real classes, we would be asked to read multiple novels of very long lengths at once. And if you're a major, you're taking multiple classes like that. So every week you're reading a couple 100-page books and analyzing them. And I think maybe it probably helped me now so that I read pretty quickly.
Hmm.
But but yeah, and then I ended up being a German and comparative literature double major was
Oh,
what I studied.
wow.
Yeah. But
Totally different than me.
more analysis though. It wasn't creative writing. It was
Right,
analyzing other
right.
people's literature.
But but at basis, it's like analyzing storycraft through obviously different ages,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is which is profound because my I read if I don't think I took a single class in college that required me to read a work of fiction because I went to hotel school. I was learning
Right.
real estate finance and stuff like that. So I got into reading on my own. But the idea of writing novels without kind of a background, any kind of educational background of actual storytelling or story craft, it's just you just rely on your subconscious from everything you've read and everything you've watched, and then you just screw up a lot. I mean, so when you sat down to write your first of the six novels that never went anywhere, could you tap it? I mean, you're certainly not looking to recreate War and Peace, but are you thinking about hero's journey, characters arcs, all those kinds of things, or are you just kind of going with what felt right?
It's interesting because even so now I teach creative writing classes, just one-offs for a nonprofit here in town called The Porch that are, maybe once a week for 4 weeks or something like that. But that's not what I taught or what I thought about in those comparative literature classes. So actually the hero's journey, those are things that I learned much more recently as I started teaching more of those kind of classes. So I think I too, like you, was just a huge reader.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to read like the authors I was writing. The first novel I remember writing was my master's thesis was about the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, which was this battle. Are you familiar with this at all? Oh, okay,
Totally.
okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes I say that and no one knows what I'm talking about, but how that was then represented in German literature as Napoleon was marching on Germany, and there was this huge nationalist effort, and they called back to this time. And I looked at the literary representation of Tusnelda, which was the wife of the German
Mm-hmm.
leader who united these three tribes against Rome. And then I wanted to take a stab at writing my own kind of literary version of this battle, but from the perspective of the wife, Tusnelda. It was awful. There was so much information dumping because I was learning so much about it, and I was so fascinated both by the history and the archaeological finds, but then the literature
But
itself.
that's a very complex because you have not, I mean, obviously, not only do you have all the research and all the time setting, you have this interior voice that is so specific and to capture that of the moment. I mean, that would scare the hell out of me to even try that.
Well, and it was hard too because the Germanic people didn't leave any of their own written records. So you really only have what the Romans are saying,
Right.
and they're the ones who
Right.
lost. And then
Right. Right.
and then even just to imagine that, I mean, authors who write historical fiction, I just
Oh,
am
it's
forever
it's
in
amazing.
awe of the level of
Or
research.
nonfiction even where I'm blown away by how much work it is and
Uh,
how the meticulous detail.
I know. I just can't. I mean, and also I can see how you can get into the research, but then to convey everything you've learned in a way that is interesting
Right.
and moves the plot forward and doesn't feel like info dumping, which I haven't opened that manuscript up in a really long time, but I know what I will find,
Right. Right.
which is
Well,
like
and we see
paragraphs
it all
and
the time right
paragraphs.
now in
Right.
thrillers, right? We see like you can tell like oh, you can tell when they found out this piece of research, they loved it because we don't need all of it.
No. Well, it is always interesting when you spend hours and hours and you start with, a page or two of information and then it ends up being one line,
Right.
one line stays. But really, that's all the reader needs. As much as interesting as you thought it was, the reader might not. And it's so, especially in thrillers, it slows
Slows
down,
the pace.
which we need to keep, keep going. So,
Yeah, I don't think people appreciate how much you have to cut out of a thriller. Like, even when I'm working with a student and it might be two sentences of description, I'm like, at least cut out one, if not both of these. Because, like, two sentences can really slow down the momentum. And that sounds preposterous. But if you're going for a certain tone, it does make a difference. It's not quote unquote literary fiction. So you have to be really careful about it.
right. Yeah, I feel like I learned that with my first two novels. just because I had a narrator who just she pontificated a lot about the world, which I love. I love stuff like that. But it says all those little, her making these connections and she was a bit jaded and it was really fun to write. But then now I can go back and see, oh, even the beginning, I was like, I should have started on page 3. I start with all this description and I should have started with
Yeah.
there was some line like it was the screams that got me running. I'm like,
Right.
now I'm like, that's so genius.
That
Why not
that's
start
a
there? But
great
then
first line.
I know, but instead I have
Totally.
pages of description.
Yeah, the
Live and learn.
interiority can get difficult. I tend to write first person present tense, so you're just in this person's head.
Right.
And if you just have these long scenes where they're just like thinking about the world, they better love that character because they're going otherwise they're going, oh my God, enough of, and so
Right.
I'll get notes from my editor that'll be like, yeah, we've been in their head a little. I'm like, but she's so smart and she's got such great observations. Like
Yeah.
we get it. We never give the reader quite enough credit, I think.
I think that's
That's a
true.
hard thing to learn.
I think we also like to hear ourselves speak, think through the characters
Right.
too, which is sometimes those are the hardest, the line level stuff that I'm so proud of that I end up having to cut feel almost as bad as killing a dart, killing a character to have
Totally.
kill some of the line level stuff you're proud of.
It's funny, like my agent just gave me notes on something I just turned in, and she had kind of said, I think we need to see more of a reflection of this person's mother who is deceased in the book. Um, and she said scene, and then I'm thinking about it. I'm like, I think literally one paragraph will accomplish, I think, the grounding what she's thinking everybody will want, as long as it's a good paragraph. It doesn't take much. It's like seasoning, right? Just a pinch. People will get it, they'll absorb it. But I mean, that took me 20 years to learn that kind of
Yeah.
restraint, you know?
Yeah, I'm still learning, still
Yeah.
getting notes, cut out 10,000 words or something like
Well,
that.
yeah, we never nail it.
Right.
Every time I finish a book, I just had an interview this morning where I was talking about this. Every time I finish a book, I never feel like it's not like I don't feel great about it. I just don't know what to think about it. And I have to wait till I get feedback from my agent and my editor. But I can guarantee you there will be at least 1 to 2 months of work from my editor. I've never had just like, yep, we've got a couple typos, but that's it. This never, never. And if you do get that, then you're probably wrong with the wrong editor.
Right. That means they didn't give it the care and attention it deserves. I mean, I
Right.
think that is what part of me wants, right? You want the good job, but also that just means they didn't give it the care that it deserves. But
Totally.
I'm curious, do you have to sit with notes when you get them for a day or two before you and just kind of wrap your
Totally.
head around everything before you dive back
Yeah,
in?
because it's too overwhelming, right? So
Yeah.
my agent will give me kind of an over, and she's a pretty editorial agent, so she'll give me kind of an overall thought and then just literally line notes more about what she was thinking when she hit that page. And then you go, of course, the editorial letter is, a beast within itself. And so I'll scan it quickly, and then your heart rate increases, and you're like, oh my God, this is gonna be so much work. And then you just sit there and you try to be like, oh my God, this is gonna make it so much better. And get into that mindset. But I can't dive in. And then when I do dive in, I'm like, I always find the absolutely easiest thing to do first.
Yes.
Like, I don't like this one character's name. Done. Find and replace.
Right.
Check. All right. But yeah, I work an hour a day on it. So I just know I'm like, this is going to take a while. And, it's hard to get overwhelmed if you're only doing an hour a day.
I've heard you say that before, and I was curious if for the hour a day, if that's just when you're drafting, but it sounds like it's also when you're revising. It's just anything that you're doing. Anytime I call it touching the book. Anytime you're touching the book, that's just in that hour a day.
Yeah, yep, totally,
Yeah.
totally. So, and then if I have to do something, if I'm doing multimedia or something else for the book, that's in the afternoon. But yeah,
Yes.
just touching the book or thinking about it. Sometimes there's days if you're a pantser, you're just like, I'm just sitting here kind of thinking, and that might be enough. Hopefully you don't have too many of those, but so then you go on this this rampage of writing 6 novels,
Uh-huh.
as one does.
Right.
I'm curious about the psychology behind all of that. So I'm, this sounds like it's kind of starting in school and then kind of immediately following that. So I'm guessing you're working somewhere, but were you having the mindset of like, come hell and high water, I'm going to be a published novelist?
I don't even know that that's what it was. I think like a lot of writers, I just had to write. I think so what I did was I got a degree in comparative literature in German. I took a paid internship at Porsche Cars,
Okay.
North America, which was, they have their North American headquarters is right outside Atlanta. I very much did not like that job. And it was just an office job. I think I realized in that job I was not meant for an office job. And especially as a intern, I learned a lot about public relations, which has actually been good for this field. And I had done
Totally.
public relations in college, but it was indie music PR, so very different. You know,
Very
you're going
different.
to shows and you're trying to do tour press for these bands going to college towns. That was fun. It felt more like damage control at Porsche, which was not as fun. And so a professor, it was like, their miles per gallon had come out and they're trying to, compare it to Camrys just because there's more Camrys on the road. Anyways, we don't have to get into that. A professor had reached out to me, a former professor, and said they were looking for master's students in the same program I graduated from at UGA who would teach and go to school. So I went back for that, and then I went on to do a PhD. And so I was writing the whole time I
So a
was in
PhD in what?
German literature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 19th century was my specialty.
So the idea then on that side of your life is, you know, uh, it feels like that the natural byproduct of that is teaching, right?
Yes.
And is that something that you had aspired to do, or you're like, I'd rather just be a novelist?
No, I mean so that's what I did. So I finished my PhD. I have to backtrack a bit. When I finished my master's and I was applying to PhD programs and having professors in the department write me letters of recommendation, I will never forget the department chair at that time took me into his office, said, I will write your a letter of recommendation, but I strongly advise you don't get a PhD. There are no jobs. There are no jobs
Yeah,
in.
I wasn't going to say that, but that felt like the natural kind of output of that.
Right. But I think like a lot of people who pursue their PhDs and maybe authors too, I thought I will be the exception. I will work twice as hard as everyone else and I will
Sure.
get the jobs. And so I finished with a PhD. I already had kind of an academic book ready. And then I ended up going from visiting professor job to visiting. So I had moved out from Georgia to California for the PhD. I took a 1 year position in North Carolina, so moved back across the country
Wow.
for a 1 year position. From there, I got a 3 year position that turned into four at a liberal arts college in Virginia. And in the fourth year, that ended up being COVID, but it also ended up being the year that I had gotten an agent. And so I had been writing. The difference between the 6 books I wrote before and the seventh book, the 6 books were all historical fiction, literary fiction. The seventh book was a thriller.
Yeah.
And I just think it was something about I had a direction. I think all the other books, my plot really suffered. They didn't know where they were going. But in
But
a
that's a
thriller,
lot of literary fiction, to be
right.
honest.
And a lot of what I was teaching and analyzing with students, and it felt like was the more, I don't know, highbrow thing to do because that's what I was reading and teaching. But then I realized with a thriller, you start with a crime and then you solve it,
Right.
and that already you had a direction of somewhere to go. And so I knew I had queried a couple of the books I had written before, but I knew with that one, I was pretty sure I had something special. And so I queried, I think my top 5 agents of those, I got mine and then the world shut down. So we sat on it for a year and then she pitched it. And that's when I got the book deal and then started doing it full time.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk a lot on the show about genre fiction versus literary fiction versus whatever. And they're all just stories, right?
For
When
sure.
we think of a thriller, we think of, imminent threats, whether it's a crime that's already happened or it's a tone or it's just somebody going through something that has forces them to make decisions that maybe they wouldn't normally make. But that doesn't mean it's absent of meaning, of character change, of, thoughtfulness, of tone, of theme. It's just a different delivery mechanism. So, I mean, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. And they sell better.
100%. And not only that, but if you think about, since so many thrillers are some kind of, they're based around some kind of crime, which
Right.
is a break in our social order. So it is the perfect vehicle to explore the human condition, which is often what we say literary fiction does. But of course, all fiction does that. But I actually think thrillers and crime fiction really allow for almost under a microscope us looking at what happens when the social order breaks down.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, because I think all good storytelling is rooted around some kind of conflict. And I think once you get into crime fiction, that conflict is very unambiguous, right? And because it's unambiguous, the readership is going to latch onto it much more easily. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like what you want to write. I never sat down and thought, well, what is the most lucrative kind of book that I can write? I'm like, I have an idea for a story. It was my agent who told me I had written a thriller. I'm like, oh, I don't even know what that is. But
Right.
so it's just, yeah, but I grew up loving like Stephen King or, and you read about this conflict and how you overcome this conflict or you don't overcome it. And I find that fascinating. So then what's interesting about you, Lauren, is that because you really have this very academic background. You have six whole books, which is, that's a lot of books that are kind of in the literary shape. Now you're writing more genre fiction, but do you see is Indie Darling going to be your fourth release?
It's my third.
Your third release? Do you find yourself still exploring within the realm of crime fiction where you think your voice maybe is ultimately going to be? Or again, and I say this because I know it was my fifth published book and my eighth total book where I'm like, oh, that's my voice. I can look back and I'm like, that's my voice.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first two they were the same narrator, same voice. They were written within a world, set in a world that I knew. They were dark academia. They're set in a university setting, very much writing what I knew. What I had to research was more the police procedural part of it. Then Indie Darling it feels more commercial. And I think after getting so many of the notes to pull back some of the literary, the pontificating,
Mhm.
all the extra words, this one feels a little cleaner in that regard. But I don't know if it feels as much like my voice. I think I tend to be more long-winded. I think some of
Mhm.
that is me self-editing after getting those notes, where the next book, which I've finished, I think it sits in between.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
little bit
yeah.
more literary, but I think it also leans, I hope it leans a little commercial too. So to answer your question, I don't know. I
Right.
really don't know.
So I found when I switched, and it was the fifth book that I switched to first person present tense, single narrator,
Mhm.
female point of view, and it just kind of fell out of me. I realized to your point, when you tend to, because you can write however you want to write and whatever works. I was realizing when I was writing and I would get kind of a little precious and have these astute observations, I would start to realize, would my character really think this?
Right.
In this moment, maybe a very tense moment, would you have this complete thought? And when I went to first person present tense, where everything was fractured and borderline stream of conscious, I would think this is how my character would think. And that doesn't leave a lot of room for deep observation. It leaves room for fractured observation that can be meaningful and poignant, but not you're they're not getting stabbed and describing the rose bushes in the front yard in their head.
Right. Right.
Right? So with Indie Darling, is it single point of view?
So it's interesting. So Indie Darling was, first of all, it was supposed to be the third book in the Detective Kaplan series. So it was actually
Oh, interesting.
I wrote that third book and then was told in gentle but firm terms to rewrite it as a standalone. So then it went through and it went underwent an entire revision where my original detective, Marlette Kaplan, who's jaded, she's the one always pontificating about life and justice and truth, becomes Kelly Williams, who's a female PI who only takes on female clients. She loves Dolly Parton. She drives a little red sports car. She's going to bake, like people cookies. She's just totally different character. And
Hmm.
so the kinds of things that Marlette Kaplan would think, there was no way Kelly
Yeah.
Williams was going to think these things. And so it was a complete rewrite. And I actually listened to a lot of Dolly Parton when I was writing her voice in the beginning. And so it completely changed. And she has a Southern accent. It's a totally different character. And so I think that also forced me to take out a lot of, if Marlette was scowling at someone, Kelly's baking them cookies, right? So it's just a totally different character, different
I mean,
approach.
that's fascinating because that's even more than a complete rewrite. That's a new book.
Yeah, it pretty much is. And there's now, like, I had another there's a band, and so there were a lot of POVs from the different band members.
I see.
But then I was told to rewrite those, and those now, what was in the band POVs are now TikTok videos of the band that are being
Ah,
shown by a TikToker. So those are also some of what is happening in the scene stays, but they're very abbreviated and now from like this video lens instead of
that's
their.
so
It's just
interesting.
so different. It's
But
so
I,
different.
even thinking about the narrator, like if you're trying to follow a similar plot thread, which you totally can do, but when you inject a totally different person to replace them, they make different decisions a lot of times. So you're like, they wouldn't go to this place now. So that scene has to be something totally different because they have a different brain.
Right.
And that must have been hard for you to like, the hardest thing about editing is it's just a lot of work. I mean, that's the most basic way of saying it. And I think from a writer's perspective, so much of our lives is spent, taking the path of least resistance. And if we're in a corporate job, that's certainly the case. You know the definition of it's good enough, right? But when you're looking at your own creative work, you just can't do that. And if you do, it suffers. And so you really have to force yourself to say, this has to change and it's going to
Yeah.
really suck. So that must have taken you months and months and months to do that.
Oh, it took, I mean, and it feels like it's breaking your brain, right? You just want to bang your head against the wall. I
Right.
started writing that book in 2021 and it's coming out in
Yeah.
2020. And then,
Yeah.
there were other things going on at the time, but yeah, I hope to never have to do that again. I
Yeah.
will
But
say.
it's a learning process too. I mean, I changed a book from third past to first present. And that took me 4 months and realizing just the voice totally changed. But at least it was the same character. Um, and same thing. I hope I never have to do that again. That being said, what a tremendous opportunity to learn craft by going through something as tedious and as, mind bending as doing something like what you did.
Yeah, and I do think it's a better book. I do think it now that I am, on the other side of it, and honestly over a year on the other side of it, I can say I'm very happy that I did it and was forced to do it, but I was not at the time. So,
Yeah.
but I do think it's a better book because of it. I think it's a more creative book because of it. I think I was forced to do things that otherwise I wouldn't have,
Right.
and just think about things in a different way. But yes, I would like to not do that. I know earlier you said you were a pantser. And I am too, but I'm trying to do more plotting. So I'm working on I think what would be my fifth book, and I'm trying to plot it out a little bit more before I get into and that's what I'm doing now. It's like I have probably 15,000 words, but to sit down and be like, okay, what is all the beats I want to hit? Where is it going? Who did what? Before I sit down and write, because I think otherwise I just end up having to do these huge revisions. And that's not to say it won't change as I'm writing. I know it will, but
Right.
oh gosh, yeah, I think I'm just a little traumatized and I don't want to have to do it
For
again.
sure. For sure. I remember, yeah, that book that I just referenced. I mean, my editor was not crazy about it. And it was my second to last book that came out. And then I finished that, and I'm like, I am just going to write an in your face, unapologetic, angry, straightforward thriller. And that became my breakout novel. So you never
Was that Tell
know.
Me What You Did?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Was what you
Uh,
were talking about before the father, she went
she
to
went to
find.
find. Yeah.
I love that book. And when you were
Oh,
talking about
thank you.
how that voice just, flew out of you, you can feel it, right? You can feel when it's easy for the author, I think, in the prose.
Well,
Like,
I realized that first person present tense is my voice.
yeah.
Like I don't think about what voice serves the story. I think, what am I good at? What can I naturally emote and write with? And I second guessed it with that book because that character was so hard to get into because she's so different than me that I made her third pass. And then I realized I made her that much more distant.
Yeah.
And so my editor was kind of put off by that, but it's, it's all hard work. And to your point about outlining, I've tried that too. And I think you just have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
I literally, my brain doesn't work that way. And, so with this book that I'm turning in, I gave my editor my first 100 pages, which is the first time I've ever done that. And I gave her an outline or a loose synopsis, and it's just totally different, like after that first 100 pages, because I'm like, I don't know. But so we'll see if they're like, what is this? But I just don't know how, because I immediately deviate when I outline, because my brain can't think of the good stuff in the moment. It has to be having fingers on the keyboard time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think every book is different too, right? That's just
Right.
because it's you feel like you've learned something and then you sit down with a new story and everything you can take some of it, but then there's just things you don't know that you've got to figure out when you're writing the new
Yeah,
stories.
totally. And I don't want to ignore the fact that you won the International Thriller Writers Award for Best First Novel, which is unbelievable. So for listeners who don't know what that is, think of the Academy Awards for thriller writers. And you took home the grand prize for Best First Novel. What I mean, you don't really have, the weird thing is you don't really have a lot of context around what that changed for you because it's your first book. But
Right.
can you look back and identify, because of that, I had at least these other opportunities, or is it just a great thing to have?
I mean, it's interesting because when I won it, I was a debut author. I had no clue what I was even winning. I
Right.
didn't
And this is
understand.
almost a black tie affair with 1,000 people in a ballroom in New York City. So it's a big fucking deal.
So I have a funny story about it being black tie. So I knew I was nominated, but again, as a debut, I had no clue what was normal. I was like, maybe everyone's nominated for something. You just
Right.
no one had told me how much of a big deal, which maybe was a blessing because I wasn't nervous. But it also, I was just so excited to be at ThrillerFest. It was my first one. I was meeting all these people. It never occurred to me that I would win or I have to make a speech or anything like that. And so I was like, oh, this is just cool to be nominated. I'm in the room. Look at all these people. I came down on the elevator. This was when I was at the Sheridan, and everyone was dressed in like
It,
sparkles into the
it's
night.
crazy.
I was wearing my conference fair I had been wearing all day. And I said
Yeah.
to people in the elevator, oh, I'm going to the banquet. Is this are you dressed for that? And they said, yes. And luckily I went back up to my room and I changed into,
That's so
a
funny.
dress that was a little bit nicer and more appropriate to what the event was. And then I sat down at a table and it wasn't my publisher's table. I don't know if they didn't have a table that year or maybe I wasn't invited to sit with them. I don't know why, but I was sitting with a bunch of other authors and then watching everyone who won get up and give a speech. And I had this moment of, wait, if I win, I might have to give a speech. And then they called my name and I was a little bit in shocked and I walked up there and I said something and blacked out while I was saying it because I wasn't prepared to give a speech. But what I do remember is I got off the stage and Sean Cosby, who was
Yeah.
also at Flatiron Books and is now at Pine and Cedar, gave me a huge hug. That's all I remember. Sean Cosby gave me a hug after
The
after
big
winning the
bear
award.
hug.
And I was so excited.
That's funny.
Um,
Well, he probably won that year for
Well, I can't remember, but I
Blacktop
do
Wasteland,
know,
maybe. I don't know.
maybe I do know I sat with him. the next year, because Flatiron did have a table, and I sat with him, and he won for
Either
what did
Razor
all the
Blade
winners leave?
Tears or Blacktop Wasteland,
Yeah,
probably.
maybe it was Razor Blade Tears, but whatever. He won the best standalone novel and was sitting. So I got to give him his first hug
That's
after he
great. Yeah,
won.
he's a good guy.
Pleased with
Well, Lauren, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do our little storytelling.
it. Okay.
I've got three books picked kind of at random. We're going to choose one. We're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence. That'll be the first sentence and maybe a 2 minute long short story. We'll just alternate. And then when it goes completely off the rails, I will kill it.
Okay.
So you have to choose one of these books. I have our buddy Elise's Dangerous Play.
Okay.
Claire McIntosh's A Game of Lies, and Lisa Matlin's The Only One Who Knows. So choose one of those.
Let's do Elisa's.
Okay. Dangerous Play. All right. So give me a page between 1 and 270.
73.
Okay. I'm going to quickly scan page 73 and see if I can find something that is going to work. It's actually only two paragraphs at the end of a chapter. So I
Okay.
got to, I have to find, all right. All right. You can just do whatever you want with this.
Okay.
Are you ready? I
Yeah.
want air conditioning, and air conditioning.
Okay. I want air conditioning, and air conditioning. She said as she got in the car, Jack looked over at her and said, "Too bad, it hasn't worked in weeks. Got to ride with the windows down."
He knew air conditioning was the least of her needs, but he also knew it was going to be even more hot because of the canvas bag that he had taped around her head as he shoved her into the passenger seat of the car, handcuffed her to the seat, and slid into the driver's seat himself.
Oh, this took a turn. Okay.
We write thrillers.
The canvas bag itched her face. What started as uh, a fun game between friends, she was not sure was still a game. Her breath got sparse. She was starting to sweat as he kicked well, he's already driving. As he accelerated, she reached over her hand and felt for his seatbelt.
Where are we going? She asked him. Jack paused for a few seconds before answering, "It'll be about 30 minutes." And as she slid her fingers over to the latch of his seatbelt, without any plan of what she would do if she actually released it, she had a real thought about death. One that was stronger than any thought she had ever had before. That feeling when it could actually happen was much more fierce than she ever expected.
But she knew for certain if someone was going to die tonight, it would be him.
Oh, let's leave it there. That's great.
Okay.
That wasn't so bad.
No, I mean, honestly, it was pretty fun.
I know it always gets dark fast. It's
Yeah, makes
I
sense.
did one once where, because it's improv, right? So it's very yes
Right.
and. So you accept each other's premise and you just kind of go with it. I did one once and I forget even who it was with, but she kept throwing these really goofy, funny things. And it was hard for me because I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, but I had to, you can't just say, no, that didn't happen. And so we were just resisting each other. And I'm like, all right, I'll try to be goofy, but it's
Do
every,
you
I've,
always take it towards a thriller? I mean, is that just where your brain is gonna
half the
go?
time it's the other person who does that first. There's a lot of knives. Somebody always has a knife. There's like, it's just weird. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's me, but I mean, I've done it now almost 250 times,
Oh
and
my
it's
God.
it's always stressful, especially when you have like a number one New York Times best-selling author, and you're like, am I going to look like an idiot for this? But they're always stressed out too.
Right. Yeah, I think because that is the beauty of what we do is we have time to just sit on the page and no one's this feels like someone just read my first draft, which the thought makes me a bit sick, right? Like it
Right.
totally unedited.
Oh, that's a good
Where
analogy. Yeah, totally.
Right, where normally as writers we get a lot of time to fine tune and especially as people who like the line level stuff to really make sure the prose sings. I can't do that on the fly. That's
I know, because I
not how I
immediately thought
think,
like,
right?
oh, we just switched points of view. And I'm like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Well, I'm excited for the release of Indie Darling. When is it out again?
July 28th.
July 28th. Oh, it's going to be soon. That's when you're about 2 months out, that's like soon, but not quite soon enough. You're just like,
No.
because it's been like hovering for months and months and months, if not
It's the
years.
purgatory of waiting and
Right.
I very much need just to learn patience, but it
I
is
know. I know. That's one thing for an author is like you have to be patient because nothing moves fast in this industry.
no,
Uh,
not at all.
what a great chance to catch up with you in a real conversation rather than just bits and
Oh,
pieces here and there when we see each other on the fly.
I was thinking about that. I mean, we've been doing Thriller Thursday together for 2 years. We meet with the group to talk. We're constantly doing emails, and then, we have the lunches. But, this year we are on opposite ends of the table, and I don't think I've ever really just had a chance to
Right. I know.
talk with you one-on-one. And I was thinking about that before this. Was like, oh, this will be nice. This might be the first time that we've actually gotten to chat one-on-one without, passing each
Totally. And what I love, that's what I love about this podcast is like I just forget we're recording. I'm like, let's just hang out and talk because I'm interested in you and what you have to say. So it was a great opportunity.
Yeah, same.
So, well, thanks for everything and we'll chat soon.
All right, sounds
All right.
great.
Take care, Lauren. Bye.
Bye.
All right, that is it. That is my conversation with Lauren Nossett. That was a good one. I could have, I say this a lot, and it's true every time I say it. I could have spent a lot more time talking to her. Um, we. I don't think we touched enough on craft. I was more interested to hear kind of how she approaches her different books. We did a little bit, and she made the point about now she's trying to make an attempt to outline more for her next novel, but I think there was some more craft discussion there to be had, but it was already going a little bit longer than normal, and we had to get to our storytelling, of course, which I think worked out just fine. If you want to find out more about Lauren, just head on over to her website, which is laurennossett.com. You can find out about her books out there, including Indie Darling. And you can pop on over to carterwilson.com if you want to check out my books. My new book, When They Find Me, will be out this November. I'm very excited for it. It's getting a lot of buzz already, which is always gratifying to hear when we're still, whatever we are, 6 months out or so. And if you're interested in writing retreats, particularly the one that we have set up for Paris in 2027, head on over to unboundwriter.com. That is it. That is it for this episode of Making It Up. We're putting these out one a week, so subscribe on YouTube and you'll get them, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until the next one drops, friends, thanks for listening and take care.